Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. We have our first top 16 of the new CEDH era. Now, technically speaking, the tournament I'm covering today, this Rip and Chip Gaming 1K, was a top 10 cut, but we had 63 players, so I'm going to cover the top 16 deck lists because it's a new format. I want to show you all the cool stuff people are bringing to these events, and we'll talk about all that goodness as we go through and break down these decks. I'm super excited to be talking about the post-ban CEDH. It was a really cool time getting in there for this tournament. I had a blast. CEDH feels totally fine, and I'm super excited to talk about these decks. I honestly think the games were all really nice. I talked about this a little bit on the most recent episode of the Mind Sculptors, but the gameplay was actually pretty interesting. Like I kind of expected things to be a little slower, but if anything, I feel like there were actually less draws than I was expecting for a slightly slower format. And I'm wondering if that's because people just aren't afraid to develop their engines and stuff like that after the bans. As we look at our first deck, I want to remind you to like and subscribe here if you enjoy these top 16 breakdowns. And if you're interested, check out patreon.com/comedianmtg. We have Rogsai, Rip and Ship, SEP 2024 by JQ21, who's actually one of our developers here on EDH Top 16, which is pretty cool. We have Rogsai, the post-ban Rogsai. It'd be super interesting to check out here. We have pretty classic package, although we're starting to see Goblin Welder as an inclusion. I noticed a decent amount of Rogsai pods. We're talking about that as one of the replacements for the cuts this last weekend with Mana Crypt and Dockside Extortionist. We have everything else looks pretty traditional. The land count is still pretty dang low in this deck, still at 23 lands, such a low number for this very turbo Adna style deck. We got a Surveil land in there, as per the usual, it seems. We have Necro Dominance and Necropotence, both the double Necro package here, which seems to be a staple of Rogsai. A lot of Rogsais are now on Bolas' Citadel for those lines too. You had the classic win conditions with Underworld Breach, Thassa's Oracle in the deck, getting a lot more new tools as of late, things like Valley of Floodcaller, Flare of Duplication, all that kind of stuff. And Rogsai seems to be business as usual. I did actually play against Jaqui here, and actually was one of my losses for this event. So yeah, obviously still doing pretty well with Rogsai. We had a really interesting game where I had Remora out, but didn't have any untapped mana, and they had to navigate a pretty tight storm line with this Rogsai deck. All in all, the Rogsai does feel a tick slower without those two cards, and I know we talked about it during our game, but there was a moment where had Jay been able to go and tutor up Dockside Extortionist, it would have saved them a number of Mystic Remora draws during their storm turn. So I do think we are starting to see the impact of Crypt and Dockside not being in this deck for sure. We have Ravic Burn here with TNT like it's 2018 with a really interesting Tymna Thrasios deck. There's actually a decent amount of Tymna Thras here in this top cut for this tournament. We have TNT, pretty standard stuff. We've got win conditions with Devoted Druid. I think they are probably going to be using the Swift Reconfiguration win condition as well. Seems like they're not using the Machine God's Effigy, but Swift Recon able to turn Devoted Druid into a vehicle, which means it can make infinite green mana. Seems to be the only Devoted Druid line I'm noticing in this deck. There is Adnaz as one of the win conditions in this Tymna Thras list, so maybe a little bit faster than the Tymna Thras of Olden. You have your Tainted Pact and Demonic Consultation with Thassa's Oracle lines, as per usual. Apart from that, that seems to be the main way to win the game, apart from Mnemonic Betrayal. We have Psychic Frog in the 99, which I think is a really interesting inclusion, and one that people had been starting to talk about a little more often, so super interesting to see the frog as an inclusion here in some of these new CEDH decks in the new era. So see if the frog continues to put in work. I'm kind of surprised to see it in a non-breach style deck. I feel like its ability to dump cards, or at least like graveyard mattering style deck. So the graveyard doesn't seem to matter as much for a deck like this. So kind of interesting to see that. We've got definitely a solid grind here, like definitely Training Grounds and Rhystic Study and Seaborn Muse. So definitely a lot of the Tymna Thrasios stuff of old with a really cool, interesting new spin. Tymna Thras, I think we're going to be seeing a decent amount more of in the new age. And, you know, I think I talked about this on another video where I like that Tymna Thras is a little more flexible than something like Blue Farm, right? We're able to get more sort of variety of things that Tymna Thrasios can do, whereas Blue Farm sort of had to be built the same way every single time, right? Tymna Crom was traditionally built the exact same way. So I like this this angle from Tymna Thras, kind of giving its own variant on what a 4-color mid-range deck can look like in the format. we have Mac Daddy here with Old MacDonald Had a Blue Farm. We have a blue farm list, which is definitely interesting to see how these decks have evolved in the current metagame. I think the artifact packages, so we're down to 11 artifacts still featuring a Mox Opal, which is so crazy to me. One of them being a 4-drop. So this Mox Opal, I guarantee, is almost never online. You do have one artifact in Esper Sentinel, and I guess 2 in the creature suite with Phyrexian Metamorph, and the ability to make treasures with Ragavan, but that Mox Opal, and I guess Lotho too. But still, these are some very inconsistent treasure producers and stuff like that. So I have a hard time believing these Mox Opals will be turned on within the first couple turns of these games. Very interesting stuff. Apart from that, Blue Farm kind of looking a little bit like usual in the rest of the inclusions. We have Copy Artifact, which is I know has picked up popularity as of late. Necro Lines, which is really interesting given how this version is definitely a little bit slower than it was previously. We have Born, but I don't know if we have. I don't see any Flood Caller here, so Born being really the only. Born to Final Fortune being the payoffs for those Necro Lines. We're on Fire Covenant in this slower blue farm list, definitely adding a little bit more to the grindy aspect, and then a Strix Serenade, which is not traditionally played as much in blue farm. One of the pieces that kind of indicates to me that the deck is getting a little slower, ready to grind in some of these more blue farm focused games. Interesting stuff here as we kind of see some of the beginnings of what blue farm kind of looks like post ban, and with it being slowed down a bit by the Crypt, Dockside, and Jewel Lotus bannings. We have POW 2 with Yuriko Tempo CEDH. So this starts our players who did get to 2 wins in the tournament, but because of the breakers, for some reason, the people with buys were being put in a higher bracket than the people without buys. So there were a couple of folks in this tournament, myself included, who had 2 wins and that were pushed out by players who had 1 win and 1 buy, because it was only a 4-round top 10 cut, right? So for some reason that was happening with the system, which I think, I've heard from people this has been happening for like a little while now, that for some reason buys are being taken higher in these tournaments, which is a little bit, obviously it feels a bit like a mistake in the system. But it's rather unfortunate. So this is one of those lists I especially want to highlight because one of the 2 win players who did not make the top 10 cut for this tournament. So it's going to be a little different than other top 16 breakdowns we can go to, because there was no chance for the 11 through 16th lists to potentially continue advancing in the tournament. But we have this Yuriko Tempo CEDH list, and Yuriko we kind of talked about as one of the big winners from this tournament. We have the brand new Kaito Bane of Nightmares, which I went on record in the Mind Sculptors saying this is probably one of the craziest things to ever happen to Yuriko pilots. It on its own with Yuriko on the battlefield is able to get a Yuriko trigger and then potentially use its 0 ability to surveil 2 and then draw a card for each opponent who lost life, which if you're doing Yuriko the correct way is each of your opponents. So suddenly this card for 1 blue black can ninjutsu in, hit your opponent, get a ninjutsu trigger, flip over, deal damage to all your opponents, and then proceed to surveil 2 and draw 3 cards. So yeah, I think Kaito is very, very strong for these Yuriko decks, and truly an amazing pickup for this deck. Yuriko is, as we mentioned, one of the better pickups from this banning because they are pretty unaffected by a lot of these bans. Meanwhile, their own game plans are still going strong, right? I've been talking to a decent amount of Yuriko pilots saying nano gene conversion is probably one of the ways that they are winning the most nowadays, basically turning each of your creatures to a non-legendary Yuriko, hitting them a bunch and getting many a Yuriko trigger, right? It stacks in a multiplying way, right? As soon as you have 2 creatures, they each get 2 Yuriko triggers. If 3 Yuriko copies hit, they each creates 9 triggers in total. If 4, 16, and so on and so on. So obviously a very quick way to be able to flip over a bunch of damage and destroy your opponents. Doomsday lines in here to be able to set up a Thassa's Oracle win condition. Yuriko is a very efficient deck at cracking Doomsday piles. Pretty straightforward there. We have Roaming Throne, double all those ninja triggers, and a lot of interaction as Yuriko is known to have. Things like Subtlety. A lot of these free spells up here that you can cast by pitching cards away, like Force of Despair, Deadly Relic, Flare, all the stuff. So we have a nice top cut performance here by Yuriko. And I also saw that a lot of these lists are starting to play Bloodchief Essential, which I really like as a Yuriko inclusion. Want to thank one of our episode sponsors, ToaMagic.com. If you want to pick up your Magic singles, Toa Magic has an insanely good inventory. You can go to ToaMagic.com to pick up your singles, have them shipped to you, as well as you can pick them up at location during major events like SCGs, things like that. So ToaMagic.com, and the MagicCon Vegas is coming up, so they will most likely be there. I have yet to see a MagicCon without Toa Magic, and they have an amazing booth, a great selection of cards. Go check them out. Check out ToaMagic.com and use code comedian to get a discount off your order. Oh, hey, it's me. This is my precious list. This was Derevi Imperial Tactician. I said that I really liked its positioning after the ban, as it was able to basically position itself to where it wasn't as affected as a lot of the other creature combos in the format. And then Derevi being a card that gets around Dragonshield Magistrate, which I can imagine being a card very important in the current metagame. It sort of minimizes how effective Bowmasters is because of that as well. So I'm very happy with how it went. Derevi felt really, really solid into the new meta, being able to attack it in a way in which you are just able to set your Derevi engines up and get a good amount of value. For those who haven't seen this sort of like modern Derevi variant, it really tends to abuse the fact that we have access to Shorikai and the One Ring, both being fantastic engines to start tapping and untapping and getting a bunch of value off of. Shorikai obviously gets you bodies as well when you start activating, so you're getting card advantage, getting card selection. You're also creating more bodies so that you're untapping more permanents with Derevi on the next combat. It's a really, really easy way to start snowballing a bunch of advantage. The One Ring, same thing. But you're just putting a ton of cards in hand as opposed to Shorikai, which is also making bodies, but you're putting way more cards in hand with the One Ring. Ironically, I did not see the One Ring for the entire tournament, but the deck still performed exceptionally well, which is one of the reasons I'm also feeling very confident about it, because I never saw one of the best cards in the deck and still was able to do pretty decently during this run. For those who don't know, the combos in the deck involve getting infinite flickers with Emil and Deadeye Navigator. You are trying to basically set up a situation in which you are flickering your commander Derevi and then able to untap any number of permanents and start netting infinite untaps and netting infinite mana at that point. Then you can sort of channel it into a number of different ways. One of the easiest ways is to make everybody draw their decks with Fairy Mastermind, but before you deck yourself, you cast your Angel's Grace so that you don't lose to not having any cards in library. One of the other ways apart from that is to set up loops with Blind Obedience, where you're casting spells over and over again and paying for their extort costs and draining your opponent's life. So both really cool ways to get around your opponent's One Rings as well. So definitely very nice to have sort of a padded win con in that way, and to have a resilient commander that helps you go for those combos. You're going to see a lot of interesting inclusions in this list. Chromatic Ori was actually one that I was super happy to include in this deck. Not only is it infinite with Deadeye and Emil plus your commander, but also when you generate infinite mana, you can then start putting mana into its bottom ability, the draw cards for each color among permanents you control, and then start drawing through your entire deck. So Chromatic Ori actually puts in a lot of work in the CEDH deck, funny enough. Agatha's helps fix for a lot of your combos. You have things like Bloom Tender and Fabro Elder in there for many taps and untaps. Delny was one of the best pickups this deck ever got. Able to basically just turn the corner and sneeze, and then you've made a combo with like 13 different permanents in this deck. Delny like literally almost doubles the amount of combos available as soon as it hits the board. So obviously very, very strong in this deck. And then Fanatic Ronus was a new one from the Modern Horizon set. If you have Emil out on the battlefield, or if you have Deadeye and Agatha's to be able to fix the colors for these combos, Fnatic on his own can go infinite, as they are the power for the ferocious triggers, and then you just start tapping for 4 green and flickering it, flickering Derevi to untap it and going infinite from there. One of the new spicier inclusions that unfortunately I did not see during the course of this tournament is the Growing Rights of Illamoc. As those many people know, Derevi plus Emil plus Gaia's Cradle is a combo, and this is literally just a second copy of Gaia's Cradle. It's really as simple as that. One thing that might not jump out to people right away is they see a card like Wargate, and I assume, okay, what creatures and what artifacts and enchantments do I go get with this card? And a lot of the time when I play Wargate, often I put 0 into the mana cost and just pay the Bant cost and go grab my Gaia's Cradle, which is a pretty neat synergy that you get access to in this deck. Derevi is definitely a deck that takes a little bit of work, but the work pays off in really interesting dividends. And there's a lot of really cute synergies that you probably won't get the first time you work on a deck like this. Things like Mockingbird actually granting the clones flying ends up being a really huge thing. I actually played one of the games in this event where I was playing against a Luris and Ezio deck, and then 2 Yurikos, and by the end of it, the 2 decks that weren't Yuriko both had Mockingbird copies of Yuriko. Meanwhile, there was also 2 Yuriko decks at the table, and that game got very out of hand very fast, and I was able to win that when eventually I got Delny down to get double triggers off of my copied Yuriko. My flying copy of Yuriko, to be clear. But that being said, the deck is super flexible, super fun. I still have a ton of fun playing it. And I still think it's going to be like in my roster of decks for this new CEDH metagame. I have a ton of fun with Derevi. It definitely has some flaws in it, but it's another one of those decks that is just like way better than you might think it is as soon as you become comfortable with the play pattern. So really cool deck, definitely gives you a number of flexible options, and honestly, we'll be seeing it again from my hands. I really like this deck, and what a lot of people didn't see was behind the scenes after I made a run with this last December at the Chaos tournaments. I was playing this deck a lot when I wasn't on camera, or during tournaments. This was like one of the decks I was playing a decent amount off camera and during casual pods of CEDH. So it's a deck I really enjoy, and I will definitely keep working on. We have Khalil here with Tivit, the Master of Ceremonies. Very good deck description. This is a Tivit mid-range deck here in the new CEDH, and it's got some cool stuff. We got Containment Priest in the 99 of this deck, and definitely going deep into the Esper control shell. Solitude, definitely not one that I've seen a lot in CEDH, but pretty sweet here. I like Urza coming back to these Tivit decks, especially given the fact that it's a card that's going to get way less punished in the modern metagame without a Dockside coming around. This is definitely the classic Esper control style Tivit, and as we're kind of seeing, this deck was still able to perform very well in this tournament, even without Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus. And often, the Tivit decks were punching in Blind Obedience and Dauntless Dismantler just to deal with the fact that they feed the ever-living piss out of a Dockside. And now they don't need to. They can still play all their artifacts, have a bunch of value pieces. I was talking with Khalil after the tournament saying Agatha Soul Cauldron, just a really good piece of graveyard hate, even though this deck really isn't using a ton of creature activated ability. This piece is in here really just as a disruptive tool. Love seeing Disruptor Flute in here. Anyone who hasn't tried this piece and is playing a deck that's like even slightly more mid-rangey, really give this card a shot, because it genuinely will surprise you with how effective it is. I was really happy every time I played this so far. We got some really interesting stuff in here like Thraben Charm and Vanishing Verse. So Khalil definitely known for playing some more off the beaten path control pieces, but being a very solid control player here. And Final Showdown is one I haven't seen yet in CEDH. So pretty cool stuff here for this CEDH list. Instant speed board wipes aplenty. Definitely really interesting, and cool to see this Tivit list still up at the top tables, even without Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt. We have Deeds 263 here with Davy Jones' locker number is 69. Rip Dockside. This is a Malcolm Vile Smasher list, a list I was skeptical that would survive the bannings, but here we are. And honestly, that's been one of the themes of this week, not just with this tournament, but a number of other tournaments. There were decks like Grixis Dargo and Rocco and Rograk Thrasios that I was like, there's no way these decks get played without the pieces that they are used to having. But I've been wrong. This is really cool stuff here. So this is a really interesting Grixis Pirates variant. We've got heavy pirate theme here with Ragavan, Siren, Spectral, Spyglass Siren, a bunch of pirates here in the early game. We have our classic Glinthorn Buccaneer combo, obviously going infinite with our Commander Malcolm. We have Valley Flood Caller lines in here. I'm wondering if this is a Nas. So this is a Nas deck variant too, and I'm assuming there's at least Necropotence. Yep. Okay, so we have Necro here for those Necro lines. What are the payoffs for Necro? We saw Valley Flood Caller, we have Born, and Final Fortune. So all three of the Necro payoffs for the instant speed and or extra turn wins after Necro. We got a Daze here, so this deck's definitely trying to get pretty low to the ground. Imagining Malcolm doesn't come down on turn 1 a ton, but I think that's why you have all these 1-drop pirates for the turn 2 Malcolm maybe being a little bit more consistent. And a lot of interaction in this deck, things like Flare of Denial, all that kind of stuff. then it makes sense to see the map making pirate here over something like a changeling outcast, because Spyglass Siren can be sacked for the blue fair, which is a really nice upgrade that this deck gets comparatively to some other variants of Malcolm strategies. So really cool stuff here. Lively Dirge starting to get picked up a lot in these Grixis Malcolm decks, just as a quick way to entomb and reanimate your Glinthorn Buccaneer. Really cool stuff. And very cool to see here that this Grixis Malcolm deck is living, thriving, still doing its thing here in CEDH. There was a couple Sisseys here at Rip and Chip, but here is our top 10 Sissay. Sippe Summer Weather here by our pilot, Lynx RZ. We have Sissay with no Dockside. We got a Teferi who slows the sunset for some sweet Sissay combos here in this deck. And you'll notice there's no Nicol Bolas Planeswalker in this Sissay variant. Is this a Chromatic Ori variant? It's not. Whoa, how does this Sissay list actually win the game? That's a fun little change of events. We've got some Zavala lines here in the deck. We have Seedborn Muse. I've seen a bunch of these Sissay pods moving over to Seedborn Muse as a way to win the game. There's also Felidar Guardian lines here with Saheeli. We have Emil here still in the deck, no longer for Dockside lines, but still here for the Dorevi and Gaia's Kratos lines. We have more haste enablers in the form of Chainer and things like that. And some interesting pieces here like Lazav the Multifarious and Catilda, which have not been played in these decks for a pretty decent amount of time at this point, which is really interesting to see some of these more spicy legendary includes. Got a pretty decent interaction package here in the deck. Definitely some stuff off the beaten path like March and stuff like that. And oh, well, this is a Chromatic Ori list. I don't know how that did not show up before. I think it was the way it was grouped. I had to resort it by mana value. But yeah, okay. So this is a Sissay variant that is mostly trying to win through the Cultist of the Absolute chain that goes from Cultist to our lovely Planeswalker here, Dihada, that goes all the way up to Chromatic Ori at the 7-drop slot. A lot of folks are thinking that post Dockside, this, because it's an artifact and because it does not care about summoning sickness, that Chromatic Ori lines are going to be probably the best way to end the game moving forward with Sissay strategies. Now, a lot of those conversations have usually included the idea that they are still doing that while also being able to use the Planeswalker lines that were previously used in the deck. So this one's definitely a little bit spicy in the fact that it's not kind of going for that more traditional Sissay plan of using the Planeswalker chains, which does give you more spaces in the deck for some interesting pieces like these. So pretty cool to see the adaptations from Sissay. Definitely interested to see how the deck continues to evolve into the new metagame. Also worth noting, I guess, that Invigorate is in here as a quick way to boost your Sissay for Sissay activations, which is definitely a spicy include that I've seen once in a blue moon, but it's pretty cool stuff here. So congrats to our Sissay pilot for the top 16. We have Twang or Jman here with I love the brewing space, but hate how slow the format is. Doesn't feel like CEDH by yours truly. That's Jman for you. All right, Jman playing the spice today with some Blood Pod. Timnatana Blood Pod in here, trying to win by going up the chain from our 3-drop all the way through a Kiki Jiki line. So using either a piece like Vivian or down here with Birthing Pod, able to go up the chain by going Felidar Guardian into Karmic Guide, into Kiki Jiki, reanimating the make copy Felidar, to be able to win the game through either the Planeswalker loop that we talked about a second ago or through the Birthing Pod. So pretty cool stuff there. There's also lines with the Jolly Balloon Man, as that also can go infinite with certain pieces like Village Bellringer if you have a number of mana dorks that are appropriately doing that, as well as Kiki being able to go with Bellringer as well. So a lot of the classic grindy Blood Pod stuff here. Not as many stacks pieces as I'm used to in Blood Pod lines here. There's also, I guess, worth mentioning Goblin Sharpshooter lines here for the Kiki stuff too. Basically, if you get... Well, Goblin actually doesn't go infinite with Kiki. It goes infinite with Splinter Twin, which is down here in the enchantment section. You're basically able to, as long as there's a 1/1 on the battlefield, make a Splinter Twin copy of Goblin Sharpshooter, then you ping the 1/1, and then you start having the fake goblin ping itself and then ping with it's a whole thing. So basically you make a bunch of goblins with Splinter Twin and you're able to shoot down the table. So there's a lot of that layered sort of crunchy sacrificey stuff here. Definitely very low artifact count in this variant of the deck. Kind of surprised to see so low on artifacts, especially because there's not a lot of like I didn't see like a collector oof or anything like that in the 99 of the deck. So a little bit surprised to see such a low artifact count given the artifact freedom that you have in this deck to still use pieces like Mox Diamond and stuff like that. No, there is Mox Diamond. Okay, so it's like Chromox, Mox Diamond, Soul Ring. I guess the other artifacts like Lotus Petal more so. No Deafening Silence here, which I was definitely very surprised by. It feels like a pretty free include in a deck like this. We have Survival of the Fittest lines that assemble the Blood Pod stuff we were just talking about with Kiki, Jiki, and Felidar. That's a pretty sweet interaction here. Things like Fire Covenant, SWAT, Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, all that kind of stuff. And a pretty sweet creature combo package we got going on here. Very surprised to see Shieldred. Definitely not a card I'm used to seeing in CEDH at the current moment. I know some people are really into it. I know some people are really against it, myself included. So definitely interested to hear if Sheldred is able to continue to be a piece that earns a spot in the 99 for a deck like this one. Really cool stuff here. We have Eladamri Corvic Doll. We got Brina, which is definitely some super spicy stuff here. We have like one copy of a Rule of Law effect in the deck. We have Philia, which I'm super interested to hear why Philia is included in this 99 of the deck. Some pretty spicy stuff. Got some other stacks pieces, some mana dorks, all that kind of stuff. So congrats to Twang on the top cut. We have Gartril here with Jyra by Trawler and Error. Post-ban. This is a post-ban Jyra the Weatherlight Captain, and a post-ban Jyra that is no longer punished by Dockside Extortionist for playing 36 artifacts, plus how many artifact creatures? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so 42 artifacts in the deck. Jyra, a historic storm style deck. Every time you play Jyra, you get to then play a bunch of historic spells, draw through your deck, and set up a bunch of different loops throughout the deck. There's a bunch of things you can do, things like playing Burgi to start netting a bunch of mana as you go through this process. Traditionally, there's some sort of Sensei's Divining Top lines in these decks. I don't know. In this, yeah, so we have the Crystal Skull, the Isu Spyglass, and Mystic Forge in this deck, able to set up and the Reality Chip, which we already looked at. So setting up Infinite Sensei's Divining Top lines as you go through the deck. You're able to make a very high storm count and do all that stuff. There's also breach lines in this deck. You can also set up a Words of Wind combo. Basically, if you get a 0-drop rock and something like a Burgi or some way to pay the additional mana, you are able to play the 0-drop and then use the activated ability of Words of Wind to start bouncing permanents that your opponents control. The mana can also come from the rock that you are alternating between or using instead. So instead of drawing a card and looping through your deck as you're going through this process, you're actually just netting mana as you're going through and activating Words of Wind over and over again, bouncing everybody's permanents, except for you're netting this 1/0 mana or at least mana positive permanent, whereas your opponents are bouncing their lands and stuff like that. So Words of Wind definitely a solid loop there, and there's also ways to continue the loop in a way in which you're netting mana and able to go for a win with your deck, which is pretty sweet. Got the crazy stuff like Helm Awakening, Disruptor Flute again, Vexing Bauble in a deck full of a bunch of 0-drops, which is pretty sweet. But obviously you control when you crack the bauble. So all the power is in your hand with that one for sure. Really cool to see Jyra out here. This town ain't big enough. Definitely a new permanent I've never seen in Jyra, but really cool new bounce spell that allows you to bounce your own stuff. We have Paradoxical Outcome, the vintage staple here in this list. Congrats to our pilot here, because Jyra is not an easy archetype, and we are seeing it perform really, really well here. We have Glaring Fleshraker and Urza, very cool inclusions for this deck. There's a lot of really sweet stuff here with this Jyra list, and it definitely looks like a blast to play, to be honest. Probably our spiciest deck today. We have Smash Fox here with CEDH Turt. This is Pride of the Hull Clade. Yeah, I know. When I saw this being played, I was like, there is no way. But actually, our pilot here did pretty well, going 2 wins, 0 losses, and 2 draws in the Swiss, and then losing the top 16. But Pride of the Hull played a CEDH deck. This is so cool. So this spell costs X less, where it's the total toughness of creatures you control, right? So you can get this out pretty cheap, as you do have a number of thick-butted creatures in this deck. And then it has an activation of 2 and 2 blue. It has Defender. And it says, until the end of turn, target creature you control, so it doesn't have to be your commander, gets +1/+0 and gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its toughness, and it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. So with this deck, you are playing a bunch of high toughness permanents, things like Shield Sphere, stuff like that, where you can get these out pretty early in the game. Sidisi's Faithful, Treefolk Harbinger, just a lot of 0/3s and stuff like that in this deck. Some of them being pretty low card quality in general, but some of them being good, like Polywog or Ledger Shredder, Spellskite, Soulless Jailer, stuff like that. Things with a lot of toughness, and you're able to then play your commander and jam into it. There's also things like Mana Gorger Hydra, which, if my numbers are correct, I believe I was being told that this ended up being like a 50 power creature in one of the games, and ended up swinging and drawing 50 something cards to our pilot of this deck. We got some interesting stacks here in Harbinger in the Seas, making all the non-basic lands islands. We have Hullbreaker and Tidespout Tyrant here to make those Hullbreaker Tidespout loops with your creatures in this deck, which is interesting because like you can set those up and then draw a bunch of cards with the Pride as you target like all of your creatures to draw a bunch of cards equal to their toughness. Not really sure why there's a Springheart Nantuko in this deck. I'd have to get clarification on that one. If anyone knows, then I'd be definitely really curious about that. And then there's a bunch of stuff like Energy Tap and Metamorphosis, where you can sack your commander and make a pretty ridiculous amount of mana, seeing as it has 11 CMC. You can use Traverse the Eternity, draw cards the highest mana value among historic permanents you control, i.e. your commander. Another one here with Rush of Knowledge. So a lot of these permanents saying, hey, let's just draw 11 cards, and also your commander's ability to draw 11 cards. Decent amount of interaction here in this deck, and there's also like a food chain win with this deck too, which I'm not really, or is food chain in here really just to, is there an outlet for food chain? I don't think there's an outlet for food chain. So food chain might just be here as a mana ritual. Yeah, I think that's actually fair food chain. That's really funny. This is a fair food chain deck. So there's no outlet for food chain. It is just, there's no Mist Hollow, there's no Eternal Scourge. It's just, hey, I have an 11 mana commander, and I'm going to pay 3 mana to convert that to 11 mana for creatures. Well, actually 12 mana for creatures. This is so sick. I think this deck is really, really awesome. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of questions about this deck in the comments down below. It's got some super spicy tech in it, a lot of high mana value stuff. I know the player who was playing this list was a Nadu pilot before this, so definitely really cool to see them transition off Nadu to probably one of the craziest Simic decks I may have ever seen. So really cool stuff here from our pilot Smash Fox, and yeah, never thought I'd see Pride of the Whole Clade in a CEDH tournament, and super happy to see it because I was definitely surprised by how well it did. We have Flashios to the Pickling by our pilot here, Double Blue. Double Blue was the pilot who beat me in the last round to earn the top 4, or yeah, in the 4th place slot in the Swiss. So definitely really cool to play against them. Player I've enjoyed playing with against a couple tournaments now. This is a pretty classic mid-range Tymna Thrasios list with some really interesting stuff in here, doing like Emil Derevi Gaia's Cradle stuff, which I wasn't expecting from a lot of the TNT pilots. They have Seaborn Muse for that extra bit of value grind, Culling Ritual for that like sort of mid-range disruption, a decent amount of artifact packages here, ability to go off with Kinnan and Basalt, Machine God's Effigy, and Swift Recon, like we talked about earlier, that combo with the Devoted Druid in the 99, which is right here. And apart from that, a lot of the 4-color mid-range stuff that you know and love from Tymna Thras. Delny's super sweet inclusion here, especially with like Derevi lines and stuff like that. But also just with Tymna to be able to draw twice as many cards as Tymna is wont to do. So the Tymna Thrasios pile is definitely playing some spicy stuff. Definitely like a lot more of this like grindy creature combo-y sort of Tymna Thras that we haven't seen in quite a long time. And obviously with cards from the new era of CEDH attached to them. So really cool stuff. Alchemist Refuge came up in our game. They were able to basically start flashing stuff out every single turn, which was a pretty strong thing to do in Simic colors. Really cool stuff from this Tymna Thras list, and congrats to our pilot for making 5th place this tournament. I want to thank our other sponsor, Heavy Play. Heavy Play continues to be amazing. We love to use their deck boxes here on the channel. They are absolutely awesome, and they're continuing to work with us through to the end of the year. Heavy Play has a lot of really cool stuff going on right now. They've got their deck boxes, they've got their dice trays, they've got their sideboard guides for more 60 card play in case there's any 60 card players out there. A bunch of really cool stuff with 60 card sideboard guides, as well as the brand new deck boxes. I just picked myself up a brand new red deck box for some of my other decks because, you know, you can only have so many CEDH decks swap around the same deck box, and I've been really happy with the Heavy Play products. Word on the street is they have also got new playmat designs in the work right now. Right now they have the magnetic flap designs with a pretty simple, simple matte or just traditional color on them, and they have art designs coming down the line, which I'm super excited to see as they roll those out. So check out heavyplay.com/comedian, and you can use code comedian to get a percentage off your order. We have Coco here with Tempo Bento. Coco, one of the premier Yuriko pilots, sort of around and able to do pretty well with this EDH Yuriko list. It was funny because I was teasing Coco before the tournament and I said, hey, I've been hyping up Yuriko all week. You better do pretty well with it. And you know what? He made the top 4. So definitely earned the praise. We have once again Kaido, like we talked about earlier. As we know, whenever we have multiple copies of a top deck, it's time to do a comparison page. Oh, I sat here for a second trying to see what the differences were, and I realized our pilots are on the same list. So everything I said about earlier, but also now. Congrats to Coco on the top 4. We have Joe Roman 5319 with Blue Farm here with a Blue Farm list, still able to make the top 4 of this tournament. Blue Farm having lost a decent amount of pieces, definitely not the definitive #1 of the format still, but still a very good deck. Able to play the usual enchantment suite, going up to 14 artifacts here, being able to play things like Mox Amber in the 99, as well as a bunch more talismans than some of the other versions of Blue Farm at the current moment. We got the One Ring and Wish Claw in the 99, as well as a couple artifacts here in the creature base. Definitely using the space where we had Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt to add a couple more talismans into Blue Farm and still kind of make things as usual. This list is looking pretty traditional as far as Blue Farm is concerned. A couple of interesting pieces like Angel's Grace and Orm's Chant to add a few more silences in the 99 of the deck. Snap still finding its way into the 99. So not a whole ton has changed for this Blue Farm list and looks to be doing much of the same. Kind of interesting stuff to see. Blue Farm kind of looking the same as always, except for, just minus some more Crom consistency, but still able to have a decent amount of fast mana and push its wins accordingly. We have the Mines of Magda here by Moose631. Magda Brazen Outlaw here in this finals match. This is a classic post-ban Magda. No dockside to see, but still able to do the Magda game plan plenty fine. I did note Magda as one of the big winners post-ban, as it really didn't lose a whole ton, but is able to still do a lot more, and now gets access to its Blood Moon effects again, as those are much more impactful in a post-dockside metagame. Things like Magda's the Moon and Blood Moon, able to disrupt your opponent's land bases. Curious to see if they're going as far as playing Winter Moon as well, which it does not seem like they are doing. Magda, for those who don't know, is attempting to get a bunch of treasures onto the battlefield to put Magda's activated abilities on the stack, traditionally winning with things like Clock of Omens, which allows you to start basically making infinite tapped treasures. And from there, you are able to pull out any number of artifacts and dragons from your deck. And eventually, when you pull out something like a Mask of the Wood Nexus, you're able to pull out any number of creatures and artifacts from your deck and loop through those over and over again. In the meantime, you're playing some stacks pieces to disrupt your opponents. You're playing some vehicles to get haste on your dwarves, disruption, vexing bauble, graph diggers, all that kind of stuff here with this Magda list, and definitely a good amount of instant speed interaction here from Magda. Magda, not a deck to mess around with the interaction suite, and I think this is a pretty heavily interactive version of Magda that I like to see. I was kind of surprised to see a Blasphemous Act in the 99 of this deck, seeing as Magda does commit to the board a pretty decent amount, but it also is one of those decks where you can get your board pretty badly blown out, and at that point you can pivot to something a little different. We have a Cavern Horde Dragon variant here of Magda, which I know some decks are on Cavern Horde, some decks are on no dragons at all, but that's been a debate with the Magda community pretty decent amount. This one's also on Battered Golem lines, which are very complicated, but there are many primers out there on how to do the Battered Golem lines. But traditionally, artifacts, treasures coming in tapped allows Battered Golem to be able to combo in the deck. So pretty cool stuff here from our pilot, and congrats to on the second place by Moose. We have Yes here with I Hate Myself version 2. This is another Timnath Rast deck. This one looks a little bit different than our other Timnath Rast variant. We have Consecrated Sphinx in the creatures. We got Hullbreaker here in the creatures. No Adnaz. This is much more of the kind of an artifact heavy variant. We have Basalt Monolith in here. No Swift Reconfiguration. No Machine God's Effigy. No Devoted Druid tech of any kind, really. So this Timnath Rast deck is a little bit more grindy, using things like Meme Bet still. Mnemonic Betrayal. having the Seaborn Muse lines to grind a little bit as well, but really just having like the Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation, Kinnan, and Hullbreaker stuff as the main ways to win. And the rest of it is a bunch of just high value mid-range grindy pieces, right? So this one's definitely doing a little bit less creature combo-y stuff, just more of the traditional, 4-color good stuff, a lot of interaction here, actually really decent amount of interaction, and a lot of creature-based interaction, which I can't imagine hurt too bad. You have Path and Swords and Strix and Deadly Rollick here for this creature-based interaction from this deck, which I do think, given the current metagame and the shifts in it, and especially if you look at the other decks that we saw here in this tournament, pretty solid to be able to hit that many creatures in the meta. So congrats to our pilot for taking down the whole thing here with this grindy Tymna Thrasios mid-range deck. And that's our top 16 from the Rip and Ship 1K. What do you guys think of the decks in the new meta? Anything really stick out to you all? I think there's actually been some other pretty spicy tournaments this weekend, and there's a lot to cover and talk about these new lists, but some interesting stuff here from our first top 16 back. I was super happy with the deck I played, super happy with the decks I played against. It was really fun, and I had a really good time. Things don't feel super crazy, except for you just don't have the threat of Dockside sort of stealing games out of nowhere, which, as someone who's a Dockside fan and a Red fan for a number of years, I was kind of surprised at how little I cared when I was playing the games this weekend. So, yeah, I mean, I really just feel positive about the metagame right now, and really enjoyed playing this weekend. So, good stuff to say, and I'm excited to see what CEDH tournaments hold in the future moving forward. Thank you all so much for watching this episode, and I'll catch you all next time.